Behind all the apparent scandals, investigation, and turnover in the White House, there appears to be a hell of a lot that Trump could be remembered for. Things that could define his presidency. However, there's one story that has been getting very little coverage, where Trump and the Republicans have been extremely successful, that won't just fade away as the news cycles continue to change. Republicans have come into power at a highly unusual time in the history of the judicial system. An unprecedented set of circumstances has created a window of opportunity to totally reshape this often overlooked but incredibly influential branch of government. Normally, Supreme Court nominations are seen as the judicial legacy of an American president. However, the Federal Judiciary is much more than just the Supreme Court, which sees on average only about 80 cases a year. The 13 federal appeals courts just below the Supreme Court, however, see an average of 60,000, making them extremely influential in shaping the practical interpretations of federal laws. Now, once these federal judges turn 65, they can take senior status, a kind of semi-retirement, where they take a reduced caseload and their seat becomes vacant, eligible for an appointment by the president. In the past, the percentage of seats eligible for senior status has hovered around 10 to 15%, increasing to 27% in Obama's tenure. However, now, with the baby boomer generation reaching retirement age, it's at 44%. Another factor is that during President Obama's final years, the Republicans essentially shut down the nomination process for federal judges, meaning he left office with 107 federal judgeships still open. The unprecedented number of vacant seats mean Trump could leave the White House having totally transformed the federal judiciary to a far greater extent than any president in recent history. The central figure for the Republican plan to reshape the judiciary is Donald McGahn, currently White House counsel. In 2008, George Bush appointed McGahn as one of the 6 members of the Federal Election Commission, with backing from Senator Mitch McConnell. From the start, McGahn did his best to undermine the FEC's ability to properly regulate campaign finance. After his appointment, the number of 3-3 deadlock decisions on enforcement actions went from averaging 1% in previous years to 16%. Many political action groups took advantage of this weakened FEC, and the percentage of groups disclosing their donors dropped more than 43% during McGahn's tenure. Now, with McGahn's guidance, Trump has outsourced the selection process for judicial nominees to 2 conservative organizations, the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, which are part of a network of think tanks funded largely by American corporations and billionaire donors, like the Koch brothers. The Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation have prioritized ideology over relevant experience and qualifications in their nominees. Their goal is to ensure future judges make pro-free market rulings and build support on a judicial level for corporate interests and minimal regulations, particularly when it comes to campaign finance. They have been so focused on ideology that even some Republican senators have had to reject several nominees. Brett Talley and Matthew Peterson's nominations were withdrawn after it emerged in Senate hearings that they had never even tried a case. Thomas Farr was behind the North Carolina General Assembly's redistricting, which federal courts called racial gerrymandering and ruled unconstitutional. In 2015, Jeff Mateer admitted openly to discriminating against people based on sexual orientation. Many have also raised concerns about the demographic composition of the candidates. As of February, just over 1% of Trump's judicial nominees were African American, vastly disproportionate to the ratio of African Americans in the United States and the nominations of previous presidents. On top of this, 82% of all confirmed judges have been men. Of course, nominating judges aligned with your party's ideology and using the Senate to block those you deem unfit is not a partisan practice. It is the prerogative of an elected president and a function of the Senate. However, current circumstances and the degree of obstruction are vastly different to previous governments. It is now much easier to install incredibly partisan nominees. In 2013, after Republicans had brought the confirmation process to a complete standstill by consistently filibustering Obama's selections, Senate Democrats were forced to abolish the rule requiring a 60-vote supermajority to stop a filibuster. Democrats were aware that this could backfire in the long run, but given the unprecedented degree of obstruction by Republicans, they just had no choice. Obama left office with more than twice as many open seats as George Bush, and when his confirmations did pass, they took on average 3 times longer than his predecessors. Now, with Republicans in control of the Senate, Trump in the White House, and a record number of vacancies, it is easy for Republicans to pass large numbers of extremely partisan judges. It's important to remember that federal judgeships are life-tenured positions, and given the huge number of vacant seats the Republicans are likely to fill, the political ideology of these nominees will have an enduring effect on public policy long after Trump and the GOP have lost power. The Federal Judiciary was a real problem for Trump throughout 2017, getting in the way of many of his early executive orders. On 3 occasions, federal courts struck down the order putting travel restrictions on 6 Muslim-majority countries and blocked a ban on trans people in the military. It was also a federal court that stopped Jeff Sessions from withholding funding from sanctuary cities. While for Trump's administration, this effort to reshape the federal judiciary may serve a more immediate goal, for the corporations and billionaire donors behind groups like the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society, this is part of a campaign they have been waging for decades to transform American democracy at its very foundations, a central part of which has always been the judiciary. By outsourcing this nomination process, the Trump administration has handed these corporations and donors, like the Koch network, an enormous victory. If and when Democrats and progressives return to power, they will have to contend with an incredibly hostile, corporatist and conservative judiciary designed to stall the progressive movement for decades to come.